We're in Orlando, Florida, doing KnowledgeFest. This will be my first time hosting a seminar. Let's go see how it goes. And they're just going to roll in. So my name is Brian. I am the administrative director at Sundown Audio. You can just call me the lead office dude. It works just fine for me. I've been with the company for a little over 10 years now. And when I first started with Sundown, I really wanted to learn how to build subwoofers. Even though I was an office guy and a tech support dude, it's important to know how to do what our builders do. That way I can understand what's going on with the customer's vehicles if something goes wrong. So since I've been doing it for a while now, I think it's important to teach you guys, our dealers and our potential dealers, how to recone our subwoofers, because in general, you can make a decent profit and an added service to your customers when you can rebuild some subwoofers. What I brought today, this is an X version 2.15. We are up to an X version 3 now, but I wanted to build a version 2. It's a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to get here. And then this is an SA version 2 15-inch subwoofer. They're very different on how they're built, and that's why I brought these, because this uses our Sundown tooled 15-inch frame, and this is an open source. However, we've kind of made it custom. This is, again, an open tooled frame that uses 2 different gaskets and 2 different ways that they go together. I have the recone kits over here. This is for the X, this is for the SA. Got new gaskets for them. You don't have to have new gaskets, but it doesn't hurt to have them. And we have the dust caps right there. They both use actually the same dust cap. So one thing we've really tried to do is kind of cut down on the parts that we use at Sundown and kind of use the same parts for different products to make life a little easier for everybody. On the table, I've got different tools. Now, once you have your woofer in a state that it's in right here, we'll talk about how to do that here in a second. The tools you need, you really don't need a whole lot, because all you're doing is gluing things down and shimming it and making sure everything's tight and where it needs to be and bonded. So let's talk about first how to get the woofer to this state. This is an X, this is an SA, but what you're going to do is you would just cut out everything using your knife. Simple. You're going to cut everything out and you're going to use a sander. Usually I'm going to suggest like 40 to 60 grit, maybe up to an 80 grit sandpaper, because when you're sanding this with like a grinder, you're going to want to really scuff it up to where you can feel grooves in there. And those grooves are going to help with the glue adhere to the metal a little bit better, depending on the glue that you use. When you sand this down, it doesn't hurt to kind of tape up the inside so you don't get junk in the gap. A lot of times there's already going to be junk in the gap anyway from when your woofer blew. But you're going to tape that up so you don't get any more in there. Remember, that's magnetic in there. You don't want ferrous metals to get inside the gap because it's a real pain in the ass to get it out. You'll end up finding yourself using pick tools and tape and all sorts of stuff to get the stuff out. So tape that up when you're sanding it. You want to make sure your bolts are tight, and if they're not tight, you can get new bolts, or you can lock tight the new ones in, or the old ones in, I should say, because you don't want your bolts falling out after you have already reconed the woofer. You'll sand out the spider landing and the surround landing on both of these. Now on some of them you'll notice that when you pulled out your old stuff, that there is a little ring that sits on top of that spider, especially on an SA series. We do not supply that ring, and we don't use that ring at our facility. That sits on top of the spider. What that is like when we have our facilities overseas build these woofers, it's like an added security, because you never know how good their glue is going to be. So we have them bolt down the spiders as well. But what I'm going to teach you is a way to do it without having to bolt down your spider. You just use really good glues. So don't worry about that. When you see that part, just throw it away when you're rebuilding your subwoofer. So yeah, you're going to sand it down with a heavy grit, get a nice groove in there for your glue to adhere. And then when you're done, take your tape out, and you're going to blow out all the junk. Get in there with a flashlight, make sure there's nothing in there. And if you guys ever come up here and look, you can see it's a nice clean gap. That one's better to see. Yeah, check that out. Another thing you want to look at before you start doing reconing the actual subwoofer is your terminals. You want to make sure they're not loose and they're not cracked. We're going to test those out here. All right, and it doesn't hurt to put a little dab of glue on top of that nut. That is a 7mm nut that sits on top of there. And here's your little 7mm screw or driver. You want to make sure that they're tight. And we do sell the terminals. So here's your terminals. We sell them in pairs. The bigger woofers that use the Sundown tooled frame use an 8-gauge terminal set. This is a terminal block actually. And we would supply the little nut that goes on there too. And they're not expensive. And a lot of times it doesn't hurt to buy new ones because they get kind of beat up when you put the woofers in and out of the box. The SA series will use a 12-gauge terminal block. And so in general, the bigger blocks are used from U series on up. The smaller blocks are from SA series down. And that's how you can tell which ones you can. And you honestly, you could swap out a big one and put it on an SA if you plan on putting stupid power to it, you know? They are interchangeable. And we have some older woofers from back in the day that use completely different terminals, and we do still carry those. Unfortunately, if you notice here, we put ring terminals on these for you. They're already pre-soldered. The older ones, you would have to desolder and resolder the new leads on it. So we made it easier for you guys to handle that.
It's nice to have the ring terminals on it.
Yeah, and they're already soldered. You don't have to do any soldering with these new woofers. That makes your life so much easier.
And that goes on the SA series too, right?
Yes. Actually, I believe the new E series is the same way too.
The E series too?
Yep. Now, the smaller woofers below E series, those are going to be field destroy anyway, so it's not. All right. So once we have the woofer at this state, we need to do a dry fit first. Now, I have two different shims here. On the X series, we do offer this shim. We do sell them now. We have them in bulk and we can sell them. They're around 20, 30 bucks a piece. Well worth it if you plan on actually rebuilding subwoofers. Now, this particular one will fit a lot of other companies' woofers too. So it's a standard 3-inch. It'll fit just down like that. And then on the SA series, I actually went and bought, because you can use paper, but I went and bought the transparent film they use for like overhead projectors and printing solutions. This stuff works awesome over paper because paper will rip when you put the tape on it and stuff. Paper likes to rip, and this stuff lasts forever. And I just put 2.75 inch because I know that's what this size coil is for. What I did, if you guys want to come look at this real quick, when you put this shim in here, it's hard to do this like showing people. When you put this shim in there and you put your coil down in there, it's going to tighten up to the point where it's almost touching. So when you make a shim, you want to cut it just right to where it almost touches itself but doesn't overlap. That's going to yield you the best centering of that coil. You want your coil to be as centered as possible. This already does that for you because it's completely centered. So we don't sell a shim like this for the SA series. We may at some point, but you can make your own paper or this stuff. Don't use popsicle sticks or cards or big thick pieces of paper. Use something thin and multiple layers because it's going to be so much easier to get it to where you need to get it. Okay? All right, now that our gap's clean, we got the shim in there. We want to do a dry fit. So we're going to take our recone kit. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that the holes line up with our holes, because there's 8 of them here. And we're going to put it on the center one here. When we build these, we build them on this motor at our facility. But every once in a while, something may get off. So you want to check it first to make sure everything's centered. You're going to use your meter to make sure everything is where it is impedance-wise. Before you do anything with glue, check your recone kit first. It should come with a dust cap. It does not come with a gasket. It doesn't come with glue. So if you want that stuff, or the terminals, you have to ask for it. And again, not too expensive for all that stuff either. It's definitely worth it. So you can either just drop it in like this, or to make life a little easier, because this is a really tight fit, you can start it on the shim like that. Get it on there, and you can push it rest of the way. Now, again, you want to line this up with your leads are going to be lined up with the terminals, and you're going to see where the holes line up. So we're going to dry fit it to make sure it fits properly. Push it down. You want to make sure your spider is not all wonky. Push down a little bit more. Perfect. And we can turn it if we need to turn it. So everything looks straight and even. Now we can go ahead and pull it out. Now we want to make sure that it ohms out properly. These are both dual 2s. I believe they read like 2.1, 2.2 for these particular woofers. So, come here for a second. I just want you to hold this up. Hold that up. Attach the leads to it real quick. I want you to tell me what it says. Now that, actually before you do that, touch your leads together. Tell me what it says.
0.3.
0.3? It's going down a little bit. Yeah. So my meter is off by 0.2. Okay? Just remember that. We're going to touch these leads together. Where are we at?
2.3.
2.3. So 2.1-ish works good. Let's do the same thing with the other one real quick, because I'll forget later. I know I will. Come on over. Hold that bad boy up one more time. Let's just double check it.
2.2.
All right. And you would do that on both sides. I already know that these are good. So, but again, check both sides. Because the worst thing is, man, if something's wrong with the coil or if it's the wrong impedance and you put it in there, your customer's not going to be happy. And you're going to have to pay for a whole nother recone kit. And sometimes it's our fault. We may build the wrong one for you, you know. You never know. So let's go ahead and get this thing dropped in there. Like I was saying, we do sell gaskets. These gaskets are like $5 a piece, totally worth it. You can reuse the gasket that's on it, but sometimes they're kind of beat up. And the customer wants a nice clean looking woofer, so a fresh gasket does work. I'm just gonna put that right there. Let's get this bad boy prepped up. Got some alcohol. I got a microfiber towel. And after you sand this up, you want to prep the surface with alcohol, just to make sure there's no junk on it. Obviously, you're going to blow it off first. Oop. Hopefully they don't like their carpet too much over there. I'll just wipe this bad boy down. It was already kind of clean. There's not really much on there. We'll blow that for a second. What you don't want to do is lay your glue down when there's alcohol on it, because it'll make it dry up really quick. All right, that's good. Now, for this particular woofer, this is the X series, and anything that uses the mega roll frame like this, I'm going to suggest you use a CA glue on the spider landing. That's just the spider landing, not the surround. You can use it on a surround, but it's kind of a mess when you're trying to use accelerator, because the accelerator a lot of times will kind of bubble up your surround, and this is only a foam and rubber material, so you have to be careful around that. So we're going to use CA glue for the spider, and we're going to use an epoxy or an E6000 or anything like an E6000. You guys know what E6000 is? It's a really cheap silicone type glue. It's used on tons of stuff. It's great for dust caps. Don't know where I put it, so we're going to use epoxy and a 2-part epoxy. So we're going to pretend this is Loctite 5-minute epoxy. I'm not going to tell you what brand this really is because it's proprietary to us. But if you go to Lowe's, Home Depot, any hardware store, you can get Loctite 5-minute epoxy. Works really good for building subwoofers. You can actually use this stuff on doing the spider landing on woofers like a U series down, but anything with a mega roll, I'm going to suggest CA glue. CA glue has the strongest bond. It's also very expensive, but you can use a 5-minute epoxy on the smaller woofers because they don't move as much. They're not going to need as strong of a glue. And 5-minute, the Loctite brand is actually pretty damn strong, so you can use that.
What brand CA glue do you use?
So there's a company called Starbond. Their stuff works really good. It's like I think it's called medium viscosity. I think it's called like SB 500 or something like that. I can take a look at it later. We just have ours made from a company. The same company makes this stuff that I'm not allowed to talk about. But Loctite makes a really good epoxy, and Starbond makes a really good CA glue. And one thing about CA glue is you want to keep it in the refrigerator or else it'll kick off too fast. And you want to have an accelerator that goes along with it. Usually they like Starbond, they'll do a package deal, CA glue and accelerator. It works really good with each other.
So you say put the CA glue in the fridge before it, or just keep it in the fridge?
Keep it in the fridge. Don't keep it in the fridge with food. So if you got like a fridge out in the shop or something like that, just keep it down low or something. That stuff stinks, by the way. You'll taste it in your food. You don't want to do that. All right, so we dry fitted the woofer. So we're gonna go ahead and do the first step. First step is the spider, and we're gonna do it in stages. We're gonna do the spider, then we're going to do our terminals, and once that's all done, then we can go ahead and do the surround. So let's get this dropped in. I'm gonna use this shim like I did earlier and put it like halfway on, because this is a fresh shim and it's super tight. After you use them for a while, they're not so bad. All right, just about like that. So we're gonna do this. Now this stuff dries really fast, and the more humid it is, the faster it dries. If you guys wanna come up, you can bring the camera up. Oh, by the way, Lazy Susans. I forgot to tell you about my Lazy Susans. We make these Lazy Susans that are down here. We sell them to people now. So this is a new thing that we're gonna come out. I think they're around 50, 60 bucks. But if this is something you're planning on doing, get you a Lazy Susan.
Do they fit any stuff in the market?
The Lazy Susans? Oh yeah, totally. Look, check it out. All it is a bearing on 2 different pieces of plastic. It's got our name on it. It spins really well. You can buy them online too. Different companies make different ones, but ours work pretty good. Make sure it's centered when you're doing it. So we're gonna lay our glue. We're not gonna do a super thick bead. When this stuff runs, it gets all over the place. You wanna put gloves on. And if you're doing enough of these, you will get glue all over your hands, and it'll stay on there for days. Unless you got pumice stones, you wanna scrape all your skin off. All right, so I'm gonna lay my bead down like so. Again, if you can't see what I'm doing, which all you guys in the back can't, this will be on YouTube probably next week. So I'm going to put just about this much. You guys can come up close if you want to see what I'm doing here. Just about like that. We got to work a little quick here. Drop it down. Make sure it's centered first, because once you drop it down, it may not come back up. Make sure the surround's where it needs to be. It's not all weird. I'm gonna push it down a little bit more. There we go. When you're doing this, before you hit it with the accelerator, you want to go down there, press with your fingers to make sure that there's no gaps. And if you haven't done this before, you probably will get glue everywhere. It's okay. The more glue, the stronger it is. Just might not look the greatest. So now everything's where it needs to be. We're going to hit with the accelerator. The more the merrier. And again, if you notice, I didn't do anything with the surround other than make sure it's where it needed to be. We're going to do that later. I like to douse mine in CA or accelerator, because I know that if it soaks in, it's good to go. All right. With CA glue, I did 2 passes with it. It's kind of hard to gauge exactly how much is going on the woofer itself. But use as much of this stuff as you want, man. Get it in there.
Won't damage the spider or anything.
Nope. All this is like, it's a mixture of acetone and alcohol and a couple other chemicals, but it's not going to ruin the spider at all. Now, one thing you could do, depending on how you're going to go down and take care of these terminals, is you could flip the spider or the surround up all the way if you wanted to get in there deep, like with like one of these bad boys. So we're gonna put these on. Actually, I'll probably show you what I'm talking about. On the 10-inch and 12-inch models, the terminals are actually in the spoke. So the only way to get to it would be to pull your surround up and bring your tool down in there to tighten up the leads. The 15-inch model, which is the reason why I brought this here, is it's outside of the spoke and it's easier to see what you're doing. I might just come around, and I've got this little guy right here. This is really important to use on the 10 and 12-inch models, just like a really small socket driver. Because when you're down in there, you need something small. Something like this will work if you bring your surround up. But if you forgot, and let's say you glued your surround down afterward or before you even got to that point, the only way you're going to get to it would be this little guy. So I'm going to come around, and we're going to put these little screws in. These are M4 bolts. We do sell these when you buy the terminals. These will come with it. So it's a little screw. I think it's an M4, and it's about 1/4 inch deep. And we're going to put that bad boy in there. I usually just finger tight it first, get it where it needs to be. I know it's kind of hard to see. I'm kind of big and I'm in the way. A little washer. The lock washers are really important, because if you don't use them, there's a good chance the screw will back out. Then your customer is going to wonder why the woofer's intermittently working, because the screw's loose. And we see that happen from time to time. So what I do, instead of going straight, I'll take this lead and I'll bring it in on like a 45, kind of like this. That way it's kind of out of the movement of the spider. We'll go in there and we'll tighten it up. All right. And another thing is, when you're doing, it's not a bad idea if you plan on reconing woofers to have like a bunch of these sitting around, because you're going to notice if you're using an old one, where the screw goes may be stripped out, and that's not fun to replace after you've already rebuilt a woofer. Oh, I got to do the other one.
So you would want to replace them depending on how much wear there is on it?
Yeah, well, you'll notice, so one thing you can do is, before you even start rebuilding the woofer, is go in there with your screws, like I am right now, and make sure that you can tighten it up. Because if it's stripped out, it's not going to tighten. So then you're like, okay, well, I need to replace the terminals before I go any further. And again, if you're using a 10 and 12-inch model, you're going to be doing this through this area right here. I wanted to use the 15-inch model so I could show it to you guys. The camera's just getting my hand. So I'll tighten that. Did I tighten this? Yeah, I already tightened that up. Again, put on a 45, tighten it up. By the way, this glue's already dry. Once you do the accelerator, it's pretty much 100% dry already. You guys want to come take a look at it first before I go any further? Awesome. All right, so next thing I'm going to do is do my surround glue. Now let me make sure. All right, I got my gasket right here. When you're using a new gasket, you really don't need to normally use clamps. But if you're using an old gasket, it doesn't hurt to have some clamps around. Old gasket's going to be kind of worn out. A new gasket usually will keep it tight where it needs to be. When we build these in our shop in North Carolina, we don't use clamps, because the gasket does a good enough job, especially on these models right here. So surround, you want to make sure your surround's clean. You can also wipe it off with alcohol. Sometimes they put a release agent on these, and nothing likes to stick to a release agent. So wiping it with alcohol helps. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and put our surround down, make sure our gasket's ready. We're gonna put the CA glue away. For this, we're gonna use a 2-part epoxy, like the 5-minute, Loctite 5-minute epoxy works really good. Make sure you get something with a mixing tube, that way you're not sitting there mixing it yourself. It's a real pain in the ass to do. And we're gonna purge this to make sure it's mixed all the way. So I don't want to mess up their tablecloth, because I'm sure it's expensive. We're gonna do just a small bit here. We're going to kind of do like a cross pattern, back and forth, and you want to stay away from the holes but go around them. Again, if you guys can't see what I'm doing, you'll just view the video later on. Go around. You can put a whole bunch on here if you wanted to, but it's really not super necessary. And see, I'm keeping my hand steady. I'm just using the Lazy Susan. I'm just turning the woofer. All right. This stuff takes 5 minutes to dry, so it's not a huge rush if you forgot to do something or something like that. We're going to go ahead and push this down. And we're going to make sure it's where it needs to be. Just kind of push it, play with it. Make sure the holes line up. Sometimes you'll have weird things happen like this, so you just get up in there with your finger and pop it out. All right. And now I'm going to put the surround on. The warmer your surround is, the easier it is to apply. If it is cold, it is a real pain in the ass sometimes. Just let it sit out in the sun for a few minutes and let it get warm. So we're going to line up our hole, get it to where you start getting some resistance, and then I'll just use my hand and kind of do one of these right here. This one wasn't too bad. It's not that cold yet. If for some reason you put your gasket on and you notice that it didn't line up with the holes, that's fine because you could take it off later and reposition it. But for now, here, bring that camera in. If you notice, I got a pretty big gap here, but not so much right here. So I'm going to take my hand, I'm going to go underneath of it like this. I'm going to move that. Now it's centered in the middle, but sometimes the surround doesn't want to be centered 100%, so you have to give it a little bit of movement yourself. And it's okay if it's not 100% either. It's not always going to be 100%. There's a little bit of a window of tolerance there. Now for today's sake, since I'm going to dust cap this woofer, usually I would have this, make sure this is dry first. I'm going to use some clamps real quick just to make sure everything stays where it needs to be, so I can pull that shim out. What I would suggest is that you wait a day before you put your dust cap on. Make sure your customer is not super impatient, yeah? So we're just going to put a few clamps on. Now, if for some reason you don't have the gasket, or you're using an old gasket, I would do at least 8 clamps, up to 16. But for this today, since we're using a new gasket, and this is just for show purposes, I'm just going to put 4 on.
How come you would use 8 instead of 4?
There's 8 holes. I usually put one on each hole, and then if you want, you can do 16 and go in between them. If let's say you don't have a gasket at all, because some people don't use their gaskets, I would use 16 total and just kind of center your surround however you need to. If you're doing something like that, I would probably use more like a 10-minute epoxy. That way it gives you time to get everything centered how you need to. All right, so I'm going to pull this shim out. This is a real tight one. There we go. All right, it's time to dust cap it. We're going to use the same glue we just used for the surround, but again, you can use E6000. It's a little cheaper, a little easier to use. Before you put this dust cap on, you want to sand it. I have an old disc sander piece that was bad, but it's still great for sanding dust caps, so I just cut it in quarters. And I'm going to come around and I'm just going to scuff it up real good. You want to scuff it up to the point where you know that your glue is going to adhere to it. Because this is the only thing holding back pressure on the dust cap. It's the only thing holding back the back pressure. So you have to make sure you glue the hell out of it. We do make some woofers that have what's called a former cap to glue on, like the nightshades. They have a former cap because there's so much back pressure, even gluing a regular dust cap will blow it off in a high pressure build. Now it's kind of hard to show you guys, but if you look here, there's a ledge that the dust cap's going to fit into. And I'm going to put glue not on the top of the edge, but maybe like 1/8 of an inch below that. And it'll start to run down. And then on my dust cap, I'm not going to put the glue on the glue flange. I'm going to put the glue right on this edge right here. So when I drop it down, this glue is going to run down, that glue is going to run down, and it's going to touch each other, and it'll create a really good bond with both glues coming together. And there's a logo. If you want to be extra about it, you can make sure your logo lines up with the terminals. So it'll be kind of like this: terminal, logo, terminal. That's how we do it at Sundown. So I'm pointing it down, and again, you would use, in most cases, just E6000, and it would work the same way. It's just it's not coming out of a tube like this. Make sure it doesn't get on the cone. And I got stuff all over my hands. Here we go. I shouldn't have taken my glove off. So here's what I was talking about. Right on that edge, see how it's starting to run? When I flip it over, it'll run the other way and then touch the glue that I already put in there. And then you kind of stand back, you can line it up with the terminals, make sure it's straight. A lot of people will put tape on their dust cap when they're applying it, just to kind of hold it out. I just use my hands. I've been doing it long enough. All right, so there's that. We have dust cap weights. These are 10 pounds exactly, and we do sell them, and they'll sit just like that. Everything will be held in place. And that one's done. Now, again, you want to wait at least 24 hours before you play this woofer. So it's like a 3-day process to do it properly. If you need it for like a show, like the next day, then you just use CA glue for everything because it glues like immediately. It's just, it makes a mess using that stuff. So there's the X series. Any questions on that? All right, let's move over to the SA series. Again, we want to make sure it's clean. This one goes together a whole lot different than that. These are easier in my opinion than these are, because these have a gasket on them that has 1,000,000 screws that go on there. So we're going to use a 2-part epoxy. And again, this is the shim that I used. You're going to use as much paper as you need, paper or plastic, to make sure you have a nice tight fit. You still want to, you don't want it to be super tight because you still have to get it out of there. So you're going to play with it a little bit to make sure that it works. So we're going to fold it over, drop our woofer in to dry fit it, make sure everything fits the way it should. We're going to line it up. So you want to make sure your holes line up, and you want to make sure the terminals line up. See how it slid in there nicely? It's tight, but it's not too tight. Everything looks like it's lined up good. Holes are lined up. That means we can go ahead and do what we need to do. We already checked the impedance of the woofer too. Also, when you, and I forgot to mention this earlier because I'm jumping all over the place. When you inspect your recone kit, you want to make sure that the glue joints look good. There's a, it's called a triple joint on the bottom of this, and then there's glue. You want to make sure that there's nothing cracked or nothing's off center. You want to check your center joints, make sure it's looking good. Just make sure everything looks the way it should look before you put it in. Because if you have any questions or if you're not sure about something, we'll warranty this recone kit, but we won't warranty it once you've dropped it in the woofer. So if you're unsure, give us a call and we'll see. You can send us a picture, whatever you need to do. We already checked to make sure that the terminals aren't broken. By the way, I forgot to mention this earlier as well. when you put a terminal on a block, or when you put a terminal block on a woofer, your left side is always going to be the positive side. Right side's always going to be negative when you're looking straight at it like that. So if you're putting a new set of terminals on and you're just not sure, because when you check impedance on this, it's not going to give you a negative or a positive, right? It's AC. So your positive always goes on the left. So we're going to go ahead and put our glue down. Be careful of these holes. I'm just being careful of the holes here because I don't want it to drip down. So this particular woofer has holes where the original screws were. It doesn't hurt if you took some tape and plugged those holes up so it doesn't drip all over the place. All right. Again, it's time sensitive, so we gotta be quick about it. So you fold over your shim like that, drop it, and the way you get it to drop down is you take your shim and just kind of bring it out some, and start pushing. You want to make sure your spider's on there good. All right, perfect. Then we're going to hit it with the accelerator. Now lock it in place. It's hard to do this on a camera or with people watching. It's almost like your heads all need to be right here where I am.
It's just the pressure of being watched.
You're right. Well, I do stuff on YouTube all the time. It's just like I do it by myself. I don't have like a crowd of people watching me, you know? All right. So that's not going anywhere. Now we got to do the, I'm going to come back around. I'm going to do the screws on the terminals. And again, I like to put my leads on a 45. So there's 90, there's 45. And I do that because when the spider is moving, you may get some mechanical noise if that lead's all up in its business, you know? Any questions yet about this particular woofer? Fantastic. It means I'm doing a good job. Pat myself on the back. All right, so there's that. Now this one has a metal surround, or I'm sorry, gasket, in which there's 8 screws that go on this one. Now the SA series and the U series both use this frame. And I think we're going to implement this on some other woofers later on down the road as well. But for now, SA version 2 and U series. So we want to make sure it lines up first. The holes should line up. Shouldn't be any issues there. Good. Now if we look, there's a big hole and a little hole. Little hole is for the screws that go to the frame. Big hole is for mounting. So there's that. I'm going to bring that camera down just to show it. So now we just dry fitted it. It's good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and set my glue. Now again, I would normally use E6000 for this one. But since I'm out, we'll just use some more epoxy. Epoxy works great, you just gotta be quick about it. Same thing with CA glue. East particular surround, it doesn't stay up all the way, so you just have to hold it with your hand when you're doing it. And we'll take my epoxy, just like we did with the other woofer. So the cool thing about this, using this gasket, is you don't have to go crazy with your glue because the gasket's going to hold it down for the most part. So even if you have a little bit of glue left or not the right type of glue, it's all right. Exactly. Make sure your hands are clean before you handle this around. All right, glue's down. It's going to be dripping on the table. We're going to have a good time. Let's go ahead and put this back on. We're almost done here, guys. So you line up your holes. Now these take M4 bolts as well. They're a little bit longer. I do not remember the size. I think they're 10 millimeters long. And I've got a drill with a 3 mil driver on it. But if you're going to use a drill, which you could just use a T-handle if you wanted to, or a screwdriver, if you're going to use a drill, make sure you take it down to where it's not going to go through the damn frame. So what we're going to do, we're going to put one on torque setting. That's the word I was thinking of. We have one on just slightly. Well, see how that popped up right there? If you go down any further, it'll bring it up even higher. You have to be careful with that. So we'll do the opposite one. It doesn't hurt to do, just like you put a wheel on a car, you want to do a cross pattern.
You guys offer a recone for the 8-inch?
Which one?
XSA.
We offer, let me blanket statement that. We offer recone kits for every woofer except for some of our lower cost subwoofers. And again, those will end up being field destroy anyway. But yeah, we have parts for almost every single product we make and have made. So even older stuff, we can still rebuild it. $50. And you already have the woofer, you don't have to ship it. You can tack on, you can either charge them what we would charge for the rebuild, or you can just tack on your hourly wage and make a ton of profit off of that. It's so much more profitable to rebuild your customers' woofers than to send them in. That's why I wanted to show you guys how to do it, because it's really not that hard. You just have to have the right glues and enough patience, you know?
Yeah, it looks a lot more complicated when you're watching like a video or something online. They make it seem so complicated. But
Right.
Seeing it in person, it makes sense.
Well, I wanted to make this video because I've seen people using like playing cards as shims and popsicle sticks and whatever's in their grandma's kitchen. Just use paper, printer paper. This plastic film. It's not that expensive for this. It was like $20 for a pack of 100. And we sell the shims too, wherever I put it. Yeah, we sell these. These are generally $20-30 a piece, but they last forever. It's worth it to spend the extra money to have the right tools and the right parts, and that way you can offer this to your customers and just have another service that you guys offer to your customers. Anything else?
So the same process to recone a subwoofer works for every other brand, more or less?
I can't really speak on other brands, but a lot of other brands do use a very similar process. Some companies have like different shims or different, like for instance, Kicker and JL, they have like a modular design where everything kind of fits together, which is cool. But again, similar process, you just make sure everything is clean and sanded and set your glues down properly, and
It's mostly the same.
yeah, you're good to go. Both of these woofers right here are the most common types of woofers that we make, where it's either a Sundown tooled frame or a frame like this, like the SA&U, where it uses this metal gasket. We are actually going to be switching to a metal gasket on the X series on up, probably within the next year, that will fit on this frame. So it'll be a very similar process to this. It's just this has more longevity to it. There's more security to a frame or a gasket like that. Thank you all for showing up to my first seminar I ever taught. Thank you again, guys. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.